Carla, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Wonderful dinner. In preparation for this, Carla and I spoke a couple of times over the telephone, and I asked, what is it that you want, basically, and a little bit back and forth, I sort of settled there, and what I came to understand was, I want to know just what I do to sort of bring Christ to others, or what, when I'm with patients, how do I talk about God in appropriate ways with patients? I'm in a secular institution, so as we spoke at the table, sometimes it's particularly challenging. You have to sometimes know when to lay low, and when, though, at other times that you can engage others in faith matters. So I think a lot of this is going to be my, just kind of what I do and what I think. I hope some of it, maybe more than some of it, will resonate with many of you. I'd really like, hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some back and forth. I really would be interested to know what your experiences are with regard to blending faith with your practices as healthcare professionals. So, thank you again, Carla. I'd like for us to call to mind our role in healthcare, and to remember that it is God, of course, who works through us so that we may glorify Him. My presentation is titled Shining Light Where There Is Darkness, Christ in the Healing Profession. And here are its purposes: to reflect on the complementarity of faith in medicine, consider ways of witnessing faith in the practice of medicine, and to explore elements of authentic health care. But to set the stage, I first want to talk a little bit about identity religion. We've all heard of identity politics. This will be a little bit of identity religion. I want us to think about the who we are as healthcare professionals, and who our patients are. So I thought, as we celebrate the feast of St. Luke, who presents us with such rich gospel text, I'd invite us to first briefly direct our attention to the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in doing so, try to see the parable not so much as a teaching about ethics, about what to do, but rather how to be. Now, the point here is not one of nuanced exegesis, but of reflecting upon the mysterious reality of being a child of God, of being created in the image and likeness of God. Often, when I think of us being created in the image of God, I recall a Trappist monk on retreat once in Spencer, Massachusetts, using the metaphor of a mosaic, and how the face, or the image of God, might be like a mosaic composed of innumerable tile pieces, of which are each and every human being that has ever been and will be created. And I find this metaphor helps me to better grasp the reality that each of us is created in God's image, not in some generic sense, as if God is the archetype and we're simply like products coming off an assembly line, but that we are unique, unrepeatable, and incommunicable creations of God, our Father. This reality is essential to recognizing the inherent dignity of each of us and of every human being, and especially our patience, when it can sometimes be difficult to do so. And who is my neighbor? The law professor asked. Not, how should I treat others? Though we typically see this parable as an instruction on how to show compassion, especially to one who is ill or injured, and correctly so, I might add, Jesus' answer is more than a first aid manual. Though the priest and the Levite see the man, they pass by on the other side because they do not recognize him as another person. Yes, he is in need of compassion, but aside from what he might need, they fail to recognize him simply as an other. The answer Jesus gives to the question, who is my neighbor, is simply an other. Any and all others with whom one may encounter and with whom one may choose to enter into relationship. Relationship with an other is the key point here. In order to know how we might bring the light of Christ to others, we must first understand the who question, who we are, and who our neighbor is. Then we can get to the what to do questions, the ethics, or the right moral actions to take. So to summarize, reflecting on the Imago Dei, image of God, being created in God's image, and understanding that we are essentially made for relationships with an other, we can turn our attention to who we are as physicians, or more generally, healthcare professionals. But as we do so, I urge again that we think not so much of our role in functional ways, that is, focusing on what we do, but rather who we are. A question I frequently ask myself is, what does it mean to be a Catholic physician? And one way I've conceptualized a response is to consider two dimensions of our life. That is, our professional lives as physicians or healthcare professionals, and our personal faith lives. And these two dimensions, I propose this view, that we strive to be Catholic physicians, not just physicians who are Catholic. Now, having established who we are, and before turning our attention to what to do, let's consider the environment within which our doing occurs. Recalling this presentation's title, Shining Light Where There Is Darkness, let's call to mind these verses from Matthew. You are the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And let's also call to mind the words that may have been spoken at the baptism of some of you, perhaps if you were baptized as an infant. Receive the light of Christ, and the exhortation to keep that light burning brightly and to walk always as a child of the light, persevering in the faith. So if we're to be light to the world, we may correctly conclude that there is darkness. And then the questions to ask are, why is there darkness? And where is it? Dr. Falco told me that some of you have recently read and discussed a classic 1907 apocalyptic novel entitled The Lord of the World, describing a dystopic society where God and religion are replaced by technologic advancements and secular humanism. And with the seeming end of Christianity, so too the end of the world. I haven't read the book yet, so please correct me if it's not an accurate overview. But just knowing when it was published, I thought it interesting that it preceded by only about 10 years the 1918 flu pandemic and the war to end all wars. But what might we say about the modern world in which we live? What characterizes our world, our experiences vis-a-vis faith, religious practices, spirituality, morality? Today's world, as assessed by scholars of modernity, such as Charles Taylor, among others, posit a loss of enchantment as one of the major factors in our current state of affairs, particularly as pertains to religiosity. This loss of enchantment, then, at the outset, blurs our view, making it harder to recognize in a way the awesomeness and the transcendence of God. That's okay. That's okay. There's a reductive quality to views of the world which emphasize the material, what can be known by the scientific methods, and therefore what is not admitted are notions of God as wholly other and as holy. Another major factor by way of setting the scenes in which our lives on earth play out goes back at least until Enlightenment in the West. And a contemporary scholar here is Carl Trueman, who in his book, Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Has anyone read that? Bill, thanks. In that book, he very cogently and in a very accessible way details the reasons for why we are in such a crisis of self. Why, for example, to many, it seems to make perfect sense that if a boy wants to become a girl or vice versa, there should be no opposition to it happening. Now, I realize that comment is painted with a very broad brush, but the point remains. There's a crisis of identity, many say. As an aside, though I think very much a relevant factor, many commentators today who talk about a crisis of identity or a dawning of modernism point to elements of the European Enlightenment of the late 17th, early 18th century, named such for an enlightenment of reason or thought. Some, including myself, will argue, though, that it was not so much a dawning, but a darkening of human reason. And how ironic it is that an enlightenment actually precipitated and is perpetuating a darkness. Now, taking this metaphor further, we then might want to consider another sort of enlightenment, a true enlightenment to dispel the darkness in the places of our world by bringing to those places the light of Christ. Again, recall Matthew 5:14 and following, and ponder our role in witness to the gospel to bring light to the world. So together with the loss of enchantment, a loss in the sense of transcendent realities, especially as revealed by God himself and best articulated in the church, coupled with a distorted view of the human person, we find ourselves in a darker world. And this darkness, in an increasingly more secular world, as I want to argue, moves us further away from what is true and therefore what is good and beautiful. So that's a little about the why there is darkness. The next question is, where do we find areas of the darkness? In particular, where are the areas of darkness in our practices in healthcare? It's okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Take a moment to reflect on where they are in your world, in your practices professionally. For me, what comes to mind are the ravages of the opiate epidemic, particularly rampant in Philadelphia. There's an area of the city called Kensington. It's gotten national attention as the epicenter, some have called it, of this opiate epidemic. And I see it very evident from an ICU perspective. What else? When lung transplantations in my world have gone poorly. The moral distress that I see almost on a daily basis associated with the subordination of patients to institutional goals. The experiences in an inner city emergency department where it seems that the depravity of humanity is on display, the perceived oppressive demands in outpatient services to do more with less time and resources. So how do we shine light in those areas of darkness? How might we help to recover that loss of enchantment or sense of the divine or transcendence of God? How might we help recover a greater prevalence of an abiding view of the human person? Given our particular gifts and proclivities, remembering who we are, that we share a familial sonship or daughtership with God, our Father, and are made for relationships. How do we shine light in those areas of darkness? In my zeal for faith and how I might share that zeal more broadly with others, I created a virtual space to store some of my work I've done over the years and I continue to do so, to be accessible to others, to use as they like, and for me to point others to for learning more about particular matters of faith, where it intersects with medicine and healthcare. On this site, one of the content categories is faith in action. And here, one can find a wealth of information regarding what some others are doing in this field. My intention is to highlight efforts at evangelization by others. Though I only mention a few on the site, I know that there are many others organizationally, like is being done here, doing so much to share the gospel in the respective medical professional practices. So, for example, one can explore what Dr. James Breen in Florida is doing in creating the Benedict Medicine Consortium, whose mission is to promote primary care ordered toward the growth of thriving Christian communities through support and encouragement of physicians practicing in accord with the principles of Catholic social teaching, or an effort that has been unfolding for many years by Jerry Palazzolo, who was a senior healthcare administrator, before responding to the promptings of the Holy Spirit to leave the corporate healthcare world and embark on founding an authentically Catholic healthcare system modeled after the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza, a truly Catholic quaternary medical center in San Giovanni Rotonda in southeast Italy, founded by St. Padre Pio. On my site too, under the Resources tab, I post some of what I think are important books to read. This set serving as foundational texts about the human person and the basics of medical ethics, while this set is suggested to thoughtful folks who are inquisitive about what's happening in the faith, secularism, what to do about it domains. I especially direct your attention to Carl Trueman's book, as I mentioned, and Helen Alvarez's book. Trueman, who I said earlier, helps us understand the why certain things are happening in our society today. And Alvarez offering the what to do by framing a more complete and charitable response to the current imposition of a new sexual orthodoxy upon Catholic institutions. But on a personal level, and in day-to-day practice, here is some of what I do. Nothing really at all fancy or special about this, and I'm sure many of you, I suspect, do the same. I use what I call God phrases, right? I mention God at appropriate moments in the conversation, in the patient-physician, encounter. Thank God. Simple. Only God knows how long any of us will live. As I commonly say this in response to questions, Doc, how long does she have to live? God bless you. How simple is that? Sometimes I ask patients, how are you doing spiritually? Wear a religious medal or pin. I'm sure many of you do this. When a patient is wearing a religious item or something indicative of their faith, I often comment about it. They're wearing it. I see you're a person of faith, I might say. That's a beautiful cross. So you're a fan of the chosen. This often creates, as you would imagine, a moment of brief faith sharing. Simple. Or at the very least, explicitly brings God into the encounter. Carry an extra rosary. Give it to patients in appropriate circumstances. Pray with patients. Would you like to pray now? Let's say a prayer. Pray for patients. I will pray for you. I'll pray for your mom. I've been praying for you. I have more than a few religious art items in my office. I attend funeral services of patients when possible and call the family of my patients who have died, and beyond just simply notifying them, of course, of the death. I wear religious-themed socks. This is something recent. I'm wearing St. Dominic. Yeah, actually. Have you heard of this? One of my daughters, almost 2 years ago, bought me a pair of socks with the image likeness of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's a long story, but anyhow, that led me to look into the company. I'd never seen this before, for other offerings, and from them one can find, for example, St. Gianna, among others. It's been remarkable, though. It's truly remarkable how often now, at work, patients and patients' families have commented. It's unbelievable. And inquired as to my socks. Say, who is that? They ask. And I'm given the opportunity to explain to them who Padre Pio is, or St. John Bosco, or St. Josephine Bakhita. One time, this was just a couple of weeks ago, a rep in my office noticed my Our Lady of Lourdes socks and asked, she says, what's on your socks? I said, guess. She said, Jesus. I said, no, close. She said, Mary. You got it. And we had a little back and forth about her faith. Another patient asked, this was funny. Another patient asked, is that Ruth Bader Ginsburg on your side? Honest to God. I'm trying to think who it was. Yeah, what was the saint? It may have been Bosco. I don't. Anyway, I said no. It's a Catholic saint. Oh, here I put a note down. I said no. It's a Catholic saint, Max Kolbe. Ever hear of him? I didn't think she had. And I gave her a 20-second blurb about who he was and what he did. Anyway, I actually had to return the St. Dominic, the original pair of St. Dominic socks that I had gotten. I'll tell you why, but in my email to the company to get a replacement, I shared with them, because already I had gotten so many comments about them. I had said, these are really instruments of evangelization. They were, of course, happy to hear that. Anyway, sock religious. What else? Here are some points I particularly emphasize with the students and residents, fellows. Always see the patient as a person and not a diagnosis or a condition or a room number. Avoid the use of the term persistent vegetative state. Rather, say states of minimal or permanent unconsciousness. Say grapple with the brain death issue. There's a lot going on in this now, and there's a lot of Catholics, faithful Catholics are deeply split in opinion and are truly struggling on both sides with this, quote, brain death issue. Know, as I'm sure you do, that assisted nutrition and hydration is ordinary care. Ordinary, as you know, a technical term there. Since there's no consensus about futility, consider avoiding using the term in clinical practice. And look, as you do, for opportunities to witness to truth. Another point I particularly drill into my students and residents is to be precise in our language and in the words we use. Frequently, I'm told by my residents, rounding, for example, in the intensive care unit, that we're going to withdraw care. And my response invariably is, no, we're not. And they come back and they say, oh yeah, no. We talked with the daughter, the family, palliative care was here. We're going to withdraw care. I said, no, we're not. And then I go into, we're not going to withdraw care. We're going to withdraw what? What are we withdrawing? We're going to withdraw, okay, maybe we're going to stop dialysis, we're going to remove the ventilator, what have you. These are therapies. These are therapies that will be withdrawn. We should never, I argue, withdraw care. And they get it, of course. So I just make that point. It's so simple. I offer you that to consider as well. Moving on to maybe higher order existential realities. No suffering. I reflect a great deal on what JP2 taught us about suffering, and especially how he said suffering is also present in order to unleash love in the human person. I think that's a beautiful quote, line from his apostolic letter. And what he taught us about requests for euthanasia, which I also reflect upon and share with my students. Though I've only had a few requests for physician-assisted suicide over the years, thankfully, because it's not legalized in Pennsylvania, I always recall this quote from Evangelium Vitae. The request which arises from the human heart in the supreme confrontation with suffering and death, especially when faced with the temptation to give up in utter desperation, is above all a request for companionship, sympathy, and support in a time of trial. It is a plea for help to keep on hoping when all human hopes fail. Let me tell you about a few patients. This beautiful man, truly beautiful man, a courageous and faithful Muslim patient who I was privileged to know and care for through diagnoses of severe COPD, coronary disease, post-cardiac arrest, lung cancer, to develop eventual oligometastatic disease, for which he had an adrenalectomy, and was able to visit again his home country of Morocco after that, and then continued to do well for a few years, ultimately to succumb to recurrence of cancer in his lung with lymphangitic spread and profound hypoxemic respiratory failure. And this was my saying goodbye to him the afternoon before the night he died. Another patient I've come to know because of reverse evangelization, if you will. She came to see me as a new patient wearing a shirt that I immediately recognized as apparel from The Chosen, as I said earlier. And my commenting about that led to a whole conversation about our shared like for the series. On a subsequent visit, she shared with me her excitement at having been selected as an extra for an episode of the series, and shared with me, this is her, obviously looking at the camera, and she told me, I think it's going to be season 5, and here she is with other extras. It appears on a break. Particularly, she was in Utah. I guess that's where they were filming these particular episodes. I especially like this one with her and Dallas Jenkins, the creator and executive producer. Other patients. One saw me for an interstitial lung disease, and I especially connected with, because his wife, who also came in that first visit, grew up next door to, and whose family still owns horse farmland next to a Trappist monastery, Gethsemane, some of you may have heard of, in Kentucky, where I've been a few times recently on retreat. And as I cared for him over the years, his disease progressed, and he recently underwent a lung transplantation, actually last month, September. And this is text messaging between us prior to his discharge, after I had visited him in the hospital the weekend before his discharge. And I don't, you probably in the back can't read it, but it says, I managed to escape yesterday from Temple Hospital. I thought it was interesting use of the word escape. Though I feel pretty beat up, sore and exhausted. He said, as Arnold Schwarzenegger, some of you may remember, famously said, I'll be back. I certainly know I will. He said, thanks again for your visit and many prayers. And I simply said, excellent, God bless you. But this brings to mind something I always do with my patients, which is share my work cell phone number. And I recognize how hard it is for patients many times to reach someone when they're having a problem, at least in our system. The EMR, electronic medical record, patient portals notwithstanding, it's still a challenge. So it gives many patients a sense of peace and assurance, I find, that they can contact me if things really get rough for them. Many use it, none abuse it. Another patient, also with an interstitial lung disease, referred to me in New Jersey. His son, on one occasion, wanted a picture of me with his dad. So I thought that was unusual, but was honored to have it taken. A few years ago, I put this slide together. I touched on some of these items in this presentation, but as you can see, there's a much more. And I'll put this back up at the end, and maybe we can talk about some of these items later. Lastly, I'd like to share some of the personal challenges, and this is only a short list, that come to my mind as I strive to practice medicine, as I say, in truth and in love, and to let the light of Christ shine through me in my work. Maintaining focus on person amidst secular medical practice, recognizing that such is often countercultural, and to summon courage to act accordingly against the prevailing current. Resist tendency for cynicism, strengthen an empathic disposition. Humility, avoid a moral police role or appearance of moral superiority. It serves no benefit and may be a hindrance. Maintain conviction. Sometimes seek guidance, consultation. Gaining trust and confidence from patients, and often for me, family members of patients. Truly recognize the poor. Pope Francis, shortly after his elevation to the papacy, he commented that knowing the poor and serving the poor was a remedy for this identity crisis that we spoke about earlier. That was interesting. Maintain equanimity, of course, in face of stressful situations. So as I conclude, let's again recall Matthew 5:14 and our call to be light to the world and to let our light shine, reminding me of a still popular modern church hymn. At our parish this past Sunday, this was the recessional hymn. As I walked down with the pastor to the foot of the sanctuary, process out, and the choir started singing, I just lit up like, well, because I knew I would be talking, this time. I hadn't heard this in a while. One qualifier, though, I might add, as we know, it's God's light, so to say, right? We, for our part, as Dr. Falco mentioned in her opening remarks, we must be transparent. We must allow His light to shine through us. And while we can focus it in those particular areas of darkness, we must be careful not to eclipse His light for then we would contribute to the darkness. And for some reason, this saint has been on my mind recently, maybe because of my reflections in preparation for this presentation. As we've been speaking about light shining in darkness, what a witness he was. And I'd like to give a shout out to two other of my best friends' saints. So, thank you. And I'm happy to engage in discussion or take questions. Thank you.